Welcome to the Geneva Press Club for this online press conference. Welcome to all of you here on Zoom. Also, welcome to those who follow us on Facebook Live, on our website www.pressclub.ch, as well as on our YouTube channel. So today, the three Israeli NGOs will present a new report under the title Implications of Forced Invasions of Palestinians' Homes in the West Bank by Israeli Military Forces. It's a new report that you can find online. It's already there on our webpage, on the Press Club's website. You can just go there and download the new report. I'm glad to present you our today's speakers. They are all three today in Tel Aviv, speaking from Tel Aviv, and we are without any other words start with Ziv Stahl. Ziv Stahl is Director of Research for Yesh Din. So the floor is yours. Welcome, Ziv Stahl from Yesh Din.
Thank you very much, and hello everyone. Thank you all for taking the time to join us. Our report, which is named or titled A Life Exposed, is a product of a joint project led by Yesh Din, the organization I come from, Physicians for Human Rights Israel, and Breaking the Silence. Our joint project focused on home invasions, military home invasions to Palestinians' homes who are living in the West Bank, and it lasted 3 years. Each of us will present today a different angle from the research and the findings, and we'll try to convey why we see home invasions as essential human rights violations of Palestinians in the West Bank. So we started off this project with collecting a lot of testimonies that we hoped will help us understand what do home invasions looks like and how they influence whoever experiences them. And for that, we at Yesh Din has collected 158 testimonies from Palestinians who experienced home invasion, and they described what it looks like from their own perspective. In addition to that, being an organization with legal orientation, Yesh Din has covered all the legal aspects of the project. We filed for information from the Israeli military. We asked for data and other kinds of information. We did all the legal analysis and petitioned to the High Court, and we led the writing of this report we're talking about. Almost every Palestinian family in the West Bank has experienced home invasion of soldiers to their home. This is one of the most central practices that Israel is using in the West Bank, together, of course, with other practices which you are probably familiar with, like checkpoints, settlements, home demolitions, and others. This fact has a deep influence on Palestinians' lives. It affects every family, it affects daily life, it affects the mental health of grown-ups and children and the entire Palestinian society. But despite this fact, this issue is not very known. And that's why I think we identified it as something that we want to focus on. Home invasions are a routine reality in the West Bank. Every night, armed soldiers enter private homes. They wake up the children and the parents from their night's sleep. And that happens in average at least 267 times per month. This is according to the UN data. According to the army, these home invasions are done for 4 main reasons. One being an invasion in order to conduct a search for money, weapon, documents, or other kind of objects. The second one can be in order to arrest one or few people who are living in the house. The third reason is in order to conduct mapping and documenting of the physical structure of the home and of the people who are living in the home. And the last one is a seizure for operational needs. That means that the army takes the control over the house for a longer period of time in order to set up an observation post or a shooting post, or in order to use the home as a hiding place. These invasions happens all over the West Bank. You can see here in the map, in every district, in areas A, B, and C, in the villages, in the towns, in the cities. Most families have told us, Yesh Din, that the army invaded their home more than one time. and that these invasions happens overnight, usually between midnight and 5 a.m. This is a fact that the army itself do not deny. Now we see this data and we kind of look at it as a dry data in the presentation, but maybe try to imagine yourself living with the knowledge that when you go to sleep at night, every night, an armed force might break your door without early notice and enter your home. How would that affect your life? How would that affect your family life? Is it reasonable to live like that? And maybe ask yourself, is this a reasonable practice performed by Israel? Now, Israel's official position is this, that the home invasions are done because of security reasons. But unlike this argument, home invasions are not always necessary in order to prevent terror or in order to protect Israeli civilians. So how can the army invade private homes so frequently and without real security need? One of the things you need to keep in mind is that there are no warrants. There is no search warrant or any other kind of warrant. The meaning of that is that there is no judicial review. There is no judge that is presented with the reasons and the facts and the evidence why the army want to invade a home, and then the judge would consider and decide whether or not to approve a certain invasion. Moreover, according to the military law, which is the law in the West Bank, any officer can order a home invasion, and that can be a very junior and young officer. The grounds that allow an invasion are very, very wide. Almost anything can be a reason to invade a home. You don't even need a suspicion that someone was involved in a criminal or security activity. In fact, in some of the types of invasions, this is done without any suspicion at all, like the mapping I mentioned in the beginning. All of that opens the door to arbitrary invasions that are not really justified or necessary. I think for people who are living in a democratic state, it's kind of hard to understand or imagine how can the army decide so arbitrarily to enter a home at all time without any barriers from doing so. Usually when we think of our home, we think about a safe place, a place that the entry of state agencies to is considered an unusual step. Among other reasons, this is because entry to a private home is perceived as a severe violation of our right to privacy. But this is not the case for Palestinians in the West Bank, quite the opposite. Home entries to Palestinian homes in the West Bank are not the exception, but the rule in the West Bank. On top of the fact that home invasions are arbitrary, there is no body that is responsible to examine whether a specific action is not only necessary, but it is also proportionate. The role of a judge would have been to examine not only if the entry is justified, but also the implications, the ramifications of such entry. In order for a state action to be legal, both by international law, but also according to the Israeli law, the action needs to be proportionate. That means that the benefit of the action should be greater than the damage the action might cause. You have to balance between the benefit and the harm. The problem with such widespread practice that there is no review over, no supervision over, is that no one weighs the use of the practice versus the damage it causes. No one considers the violation of privacy, the violation of dignity, the trauma, the effect on the mental health that Dana will elaborate about soon enough. And that means that in many of the cases, not only that the home invasion is arbitrary, but it is also disproportionate and therefore illegal. And in that context, we at Yesh Din, together with Physicians for Human Rights Israel and 6 Palestinian individuals, filed a petition to the Israeli High Court demanding to change the Israeli policy of home invasions that are done in order to perform a search. Basically, we demanded that the military commander will change the military law, the legislation in the West Bank, so that there will be a judicial review over searches, and that a judge will need to approve every invasion in order to perform a search, except, of course, for urgent and exceptional cases. So far, we had one hearing in this petition in which the state presented their position, a position that totally opposes any change in the policy, and this petition is still pending. Another aspect which is problematic in home searches and in home invasions in general that I want to address today is the lack of equality and discrimination. Next to the Palestinians who are living under the occupation regime in the West Bank, there are Israeli settlers that live there. That means that in one geographical unit, we have two populations that are living together, but in any other aspect, their lives are very different. Israeli settlers live under the rule of the Israeli law, while Palestinians are living under the rule of military law. The existence of these two legal systems that are very different affects any aspect of life in the West Bank. And in the context of home invasions, we are talking about a dramatic difference. Let's say that an Israeli child is suspected in participating in price tag activity, and a Palestinian child is suspected in participating in demonstrations. The Israeli child will be protected by the Israeli law. Therefore, the police will address this issue, and the police will have to get a warrant from a judge in order to enter the child's home, in order to perform a search and even to arrest him. The policeman will have to go to the judge and show them evidence to persuade them that they need to enter the home and that there is no other way to achieve the same goal. While when we're talking about the Palestinian child, the case will be totally different. The Palestinian children are not protected at all by the law. That means that a junior officer in the army, not in the police, can order the entrance of the home without any suspicion at all. They don't need to show evidence to anyone, let alone a judge. And just to remind you that an officer in the Israeli army can be also 19 or 20 years old. This difference is a blunt discrimination between the two populations who are living in the same area under Israeli control. Now, before I finish, I just want to leave you with one of the, I think, bottom lines of our research. We view home invasions as a practice that is used by the Israeli army in order to preserve Israeli control over the Palestinians, in order to oppress them, in order to create a sense of fear and loss of control, a sense that the military is basically everywhere, even in your own home. The central experience that we heard Palestinians describe over and over again while collecting testimonies from women and men that was exposed to this practice is one of vulnerability, an invasion to the most intimate and private place. This is also why we chose to title the report "A Life Exposed." We wanted to describe this very basic feeling that every Palestinian in the West Bank feels, that their home is exposed, that their life is exposed, that their home might have four walls and a door, but they do not protect them from the outside world. And I think I'll stop here and I leave the floor to my colleagues to share other aspects of the report. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ziv Stahl, Director of Research for Yashdin. And now we give the floor to Ori Givati. Ori Givati is Advocacy Director for Breaking the Silence. Ori, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and thank you everyone for being here. So as Pierre said, I'm Ori, I'm the Advocacy Director of Breaking the Silence. We are an organization of former Israeli soldiers who served in the occupied territories since the beginning of the Second Intifada and until today. And what we basically do is we share our testimonies, our experiences from serving in the occupied territories, actually conducting ourselves the different elements of the occupation in order to expose this reality to the public and bring the occupation to an end. And with regards to home invasion, there are a few points that I would like to emphasize. And the first one is that differently to other things we're doing in the occupied territories, like dispersing protests, like checkpoints, like military patrols, home invasions are done a bit behind the curtains. We are doing them in the middle of the night, usually, and there are no cameras usually there. Yeah, As Ziv said, we have hundreds of home invasions every month. Most of them are not documented. And so it's very important for us to amplify the fact that, in direct contrast to how much exposure home invasions get when we talk about the occupation, when people think about occupation, they are a very integral part of it, and one of the most important type of, one of the most important elements of our control over the Palestinians. And this is why we think it's extremely important to talk about them and mention them, to get them more close to the public eye. Now, we as soldiers have a variety of different micro-tactic justifications for every kind of home invasions that Ziv mentioned. And there will always be a justification. In a bit, I'll give you a few examples. But it's important to understand that all of these justifications fall under the term of security. And 53 years of occupation got us to justify everything we're doing in the occupied territories using this term. And this is why we have to go a bit backwards. We have to look at what we are doing as a military in the occupied territories from a bit broader perspective and look at the strategic reasoning of what's happening there. And I'll take you back 5 years to the last time I served in the occupied territories, the beginning of 2016, January 2016, in the area of Qalqilia, one of the Palestinian cities. And we arrived to our base on the first day of my reserves duty, and our commander tells us that our mission in the coming weeks is to make all the Palestinians in our area feel that they cannot lift their head up. He did this. I remember it like it was yesterday. He didn't say we have to make all the dangerous, violent, I don't know, Hamas activists not lift their head up. He said all the Palestinians in our area. And this is one of the most important elements of the occupation that we as soldiers hear about all the missions we do. And home invasions is a very significant part of this, to make all the Palestinians feel that they cannot lift their head up, or other units call it to make all the Palestinians feel like they are being chased, to instill fear in the Palestinian population. These are terms that are mentioned in the official army documents of different missions. And I'll give an example about one of the missions that Ziv mentioned that's called mappings. So mappings is when a group of fully armed soldiers, they have vests, weapons, grenades, they look like they are going to war. This group of soldiers invade a Palestinian village in the middle of the night. Later on, invade one of the Palestinian homes that was checked before that there are no violent or dangerous Palestinians in that home for this group of soldiers. One of the soldiers takes pictures of the family, put them one by one next to one of the walls and take pictures of everyone, including the children. Another soldier takes a piece of paper and draws the way the house looks like. And the soldiers leave the home. No one is arrested and no one's there, because we checked before that there are no people who need to be arrested or anyone that is dangerous for this group of soldiers. And now I'll take you to some of our testimonies about this mission. So one of our testifiers tells us how, after a while that he did these kind of missions, he asked his commander, what should he do with all the photos that he took of all these people in all these home invasions? And the commander tells him, we don't really need these pictures. Or another soldier that came back to his home, to his parents' home, after a while of doing these missions, and found all these pieces of paper that he drew, how different houses of Palestinians look like, in his pants because no one asked for these pieces of paper. I give you another example. A testimony from a soldier who served in the Nahal Brigade in Hebron in 2009 tells us how in one of the missions they did, that's called a patrol, after a while they served in Hebron, they just decided to change. They were a bit bored. So instead of walking the patrol on the streets of Hebron, they decided to do the patrol on rooftops of Palestinian homes. So they invaded the home in the beginning of their patrol, went up to the roof, and jumped from roof to roof in the old city of Hebron. These are just two examples of A, what are we justifying by saying security, and B, how we are using home invasions to instill fear in the Palestinian population, or like I was told, make all the Palestinians feel that they cannot lift their head up. And the important point here is all the Palestinians. Now, this is to show that home invasions are not the exception. They are not the idea of different commanders who are breaking the military rules. No, they are the rule. They are part of the system. They're an integral part of what hundreds of soldiers that we interviewed did in the occupied territories. And I did the interviews of the vast majority of the soldiers that actually their testimonies appear in this report. Before I finish, I want to give one more example that for me personally was very important for my understanding as a citizen who believed in the basic principle of democracy. One of the types of missions that we are doing in the occupied territories is called a mock arrest. What's a mock arrest? A group of fully armed soldiers, again, look like they're going to war, invade a Palestinian village, invade a Palestinian home, arrest one of the Palestinians in that home. It can be the father, it can be the older brother. Take them out of the home, and after a few minutes, after a few hours, sometimes even more, bring them back to their home. Why? Because it's a mock arrest, it's not an arrest. Again, it's a home of Palestinians that we check before we do the mock arrest, that they are not dangerous for the soldiers. Because this arrest is used for training. So we got to a point that we are not only invading homes for different micro-tactic justifications like intelligence, we're also invading homes to actually train over the civilian population in the occupied territories. Before I finish, I want to say one thing that was very important for us as former soldiers with regards to this report, and that is that we always, we never had an opportunity to think about what happens because of our invasion, not only what happens during the invasion or why we invade, but what happens after we leave the home and close the door. What are the implications of what we did to the Palestinian people? And I'll pass it on to Dana to talk about that.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Ori. And I directly give the floor to Dana Moss. Dana Moss, you are International Advocacy Coordinator for the organization NGO Physicians for Human Rights Israel. The floor is yours.
Thank you. I want to start with a testimony of a 7-year-old girl who in our records we termed as F, and the testimony was given by her mother. When the soldiers beat me in front of F's eyes and I had a nervous breakdown, my husband took me to the hospital and F stayed with her siblings at home. They told me they had gone looking for her and found her on the 2nd floor at the kitchen window, trying to put herself down. When I spoke to her, she told me she thought I had died and wanted to try to tell me. I told her I was fine and that I was near her. This is one example of the mental health impact of forcible home invasions, and I'll be speaking about them as potentially traumatic events and about the post-traumatic stress symptoms that ensue and that cause such significant harm to adults and to minors that we, Physicians for Human Rights Israel, as a right to health organization, saw on the ground. And here I want to go back to what Ziv mentioned of home as the most intimate, safe space where we have control. And this is all the more so at night when we have our routines. So it might be your time to bathe the children, put them to sleep. It might be that your time to relax and watch television or read a book, and then you go to sleep. And our focus was really on what happens psychologically when the quiet of the middle of the night is suddenly shattered by armed soldiers of an occupying power entering the house. We at Physicians for Human Rights Israel focused on the right to health of all those under the responsibility of the Israeli authorities, both Palestinians in the occupied Palestinian territory and Israeli citizens of the social and geographic periphery. And our role here was really to bring in our mental health expertise. And so how do we do that? To receive data on the mental health impact of the phenomenon, we established a mental health committee of mental health professionals who carried out the interview design and interview analysis. And we interviewed 20 women and 11 men whose homes were invaded by the Israeli military. These were parents to 41 children. We did not want to interview the children directly for fear of re-traumatization. And as part of the process, we really tried to provide an open platform and reduce social desirability, so the tendency of the interviewee to want to please the interviewer. And even for our very, very experienced mental health professionals, reading these testimonies was very difficult. Our findings were that these sudden forced intrusions into the victim's private space, accompanied by threats and sometimes actual violence, were potentially traumatic events. Now, what is trauma? Trauma is what happens when we come face to face with a stronger power from which we cannot protect ourselves. Emotional trauma causes deep cognitive, physical changes. It causes changes in memories. It can dissolve the sufferer's sense of security and trust in their surroundings, akin to sexual assault, robbery, serious car accidents. And here you have the added factor that, as Ziv mentioned, these are repeat events. They happen not only to you, but to your community, to your neighbors, to others in your village. And you also have the repeat contact with the traumatizing agents, namely soldiers. Loss of control is really at the heart of any traumatic events, and that was the central post-invasion experience that the people that we interviewed spoke about. Loss of control combined with fear for their lives and fear for their parents' lives. The soldiers, the way they were spoken about, they were mentioned as machines, as inhuman. That really points to a sense of helplessness and powerlessness over the situation, which increases likelihood of post-traumatic stress symptoms occurring. And this loss of control remained long after the invasion took place. You had the parents who experience helplessness in their parental role. They cannot protect their children. And then you have the children who see their parents in that position. And I want to read one very relevant testimony of a woman from the village Arousal. They broke things in my house 10 times, and each time they arrested one of my sons. I have no sense of security inside the house. My husband and I sleep on the veranda instead of the bedroom, so that we can hear any movement or the sound of dogs and know that the army is coming. I keep worrying that they will raid the house again. I keep my clothes next to me all night, and I cannot fall asleep after 1 a.m. And here, I want to do a deep dive into some of the post-traumatic stress symptoms that we saw. One of the main ones that this woman mentions is that of hyperarousal. It's the state in which the body is, always on permanent alert, as if the danger can return at any moment. And in many of the interviews, the interviewees spoke about triggers that would remind them of the fears and sensations of the original event, particularly at night. all the interviewees spoke about sleep disruptions, which is very related to hyperarousal. Sleep disruptions interfere with sufferers' lives. They can impede ability to function. And when it's a long-term sleep disruption, it can take a heavy toll on mental and physical well-being. So as this woman mentioned, a lot of testifiers spoke about being awake from 1 a.m. or 2 a.m. when the soldiers first came, to only falling back to sleep after the sound of the muezzin, which marked when the soldiers leave, waking up each time there was a sound outside or a car drove past. And that's something that we saw throughout. There was also symptoms of anxiety, and that often happens in conjunction with post-traumatic stress. There was the sense that the soldiers could come at any moment into the bedroom. And anxiety is really a normal reaction to such an event, and often anxiety continued beyond the event itself. People we spoke to mentioned the steps they had taken to reduce anxiety, and these in themselves can reach the level of over-responsivity. So taking precautions that are unwarranted by reality and impede daily functioning, reducing quality of life. And I want to read one of these witness statements. I really don't fall asleep, but stay up and walk around with a flashlight to check around the house in my son's apartment, which is under construction and nearing completion. I have asked for 2 of my windows to be blocked with cinder blocks because I think the soldiers can jump into the house through them. My husband asked an iron worker to put bars on our doors. The iron worker told him, it's a home, not a prison. My husband told him, my wife is constantly afraid and wants to turn the house into her own prison to feel safe. I've heard from most women in the village that the soldiers go straight into their bedroom and that they open their eyes and see a soldiers standing above their heads near the bed. It made me go into never-ending fear and paranoia. And here, I do want to mention that a lot of these families are traditional families, that when they're awoken at night, these women are in a state of undress or semi-undress, and that has an impact as well. But I do also want to touch on the issue of children, because with children, the experience of trauma can result in impaired development, especially when it comes to younger children. And that's because children have a far greater difficulty emotionally containing such extreme events. And you have the parents who've experienced distress, either in the home demolition itself or through other aspects of life that relate to occupation. And that can impair their ability to give their children a sense of security that is needed for recovery. And the children at the same time feel that their parents are unable to protect them. So in children, we saw hyperarousal and sleep disruption, but we also saw a lot of anxiety and regression, which is manifested in increased dependence on parents. We have the dependence on parents and the wish to remain close to them, and that can impact children's ability to participate in school and social activities. Just to give an example, we're talking about teenagers who want to sleep in the same bed as their parents, who don't want to leave their parents' side. If the parents refuse to let them sleep in bed with them, they will go into their own room and hide under the covers with the light on. And just to circle back to F, the 7-year-old girl who I mentioned at the beginning, F continued to talk about the pain and the fear of losing her mother for months after the initial event. She remained very dependent on her mother. She cried often. She was very fearful when her mother was away, and she refused to sleep, categorically refused to sleep by herself. So if there's one thing I want you to take away from forcible home invasions, is that these are potentially traumatizing events with extensive negative mental health impact. And to recover from potentially traumatizing events, you need treatment and you need to regain a sense of safety. But here you can't have that, because these events keep happening to you, to your neighbors, to your village, and that impacts proper recovery. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dana Moose. And now we are going to take the questions. I have indicated in the chat how you can proceed. So please, at the bottom of your screen, you have a button Participants. You can click on that. It will open a new window, and in this new window on the bottom right, you will have the possibility of raising your hand. You can also just click on discussion and ask your question by writing in the box. So the 2 options are possible just try them out. It will work smoothly normally. So perhaps in the meantime, if waiting for questions coming, I perhaps just ask a very basic question. So for how long do you think and have you observed that this phenomenon is going on? Is it something pretty new, or is it something that practices that are lasting for many years? I don't know who wants to answer. Yes.
I think I'll start. Maybe Ori will follow me. This is not a new phenomenon at all. Basically, it is very old and it's lasting for a few decades now. We did see a rise during the years of the second Intifada at the beginning of the 2000s, but we didn't see a drop ever since. This is happening since then, and it's very, as we said, I think all the time, it's very frequent. It's very everyday routine. It became part of the occupation life in a way. So this is a very old phenomenon, not a new one at all. But we do feel there is a new thing by talking about it, because like I think Ori said, and I also try to explain, this has been going on for decades, but kind of behind the curtains. I think the Israeli public for sure, I'm sure the international public as well, is not talking about it. They don't know it. When you ask someone what do they know about the Israeli occupation, they know about checkpoints, they know about settlements, they know about home demolitions. They don't know about home invasions. And that, I think, was one of our goals that we marked when we first started with this project. We identified something that is so widespread and so known to Palestinians, but is unknown to others. So that was part of our point, I think.
Okay, thank you. Has this question been raised in front of the Human Rights Council in Geneva, or will it be raised? Who would like to answer?
I would first add one small thing to what Ziv said, that it's very important to understand that the occupation in its 53 years included and still includes many of those things that we don't really talk about. And over the years, we try as much as we can to bring more and more topics to the table to make it visible, to make them visible to the public. But one of the dangers is to feel that if there are no major developments, everything is okay. On the contrary, the routine of the occupation is wrong and is immoral, and this is what we are trying to emphasize. And to your question, not yet, not to our knowledge, not yet, but we're always happy to speak about the realities of the occupations with everyone. So maybe in the future, yes.
Thank you. We have a question from Hans-Peter Büschi. Hans-Peter Büschi, you can open your mic. I gave you the opening, so you can just ask your question directly. Please tell us from which media organization you're from.
I'm from a forum dealing with Israeli questions, and I have been dealing especially with the financing of the Swiss government of various NGOs, so also Breaking the Silence, they get money. And then I look at the record. I met you Breaking the Silence in Zurich. I talked to Shaul, and I must say he couldn't answer questions as we hoped to. And then look at your records, all of you three. I mean, your record is to demonize Israel. I mean, there is some representative here in the middle of your group from the IDF. And I checked particularly your questions about 2 years ago. And just I give you an example, because it is occupation and it's legal occupation, automatically you have military law. That's the situation. I mean, the military law is not very, very much different from the civil law. So basically you three, you are, for us, we check your activities, you're favoring BDS, so you are anti-Israel. So this makes you, for me, I think for us watching these things, NGOs, many NGOs, it's horrible to see how you bash your own country. And there is nobody from the IDF able to defend, to say what you say here.
Okay. We got your point. Who would like to answer? Ori?
I'll take it first.
Okay.
So look, first, thank you for being here and listening to us at least. But I have to say that look at who we are talking to. Yeah, we're 3 Israelis living in Israel, working in Israel, dedicating our entire lives to improve the situation here. We are Israelis, okay? That's the first thing. The second thing is that I served 3 years as a combat soldier in the occupied territories, taking part of the occupation, and together with me, more than 1,200 people who testified for breaking the silence about the different things that they did as part of the occupation. And the third thing, and it is the most important thing, is that I think it's very interesting what you asked here, because we just spent 30 minutes describing how our military invades people's homes for trainings, for making their homes into a military post, for just like, we can just go on in this list forever, yeah? How their privacy is invaded, how their mental health is impacted for the rest of their lives. We're talking about millions of people. And you're asking me about whether I am against Israel or not against Israel. We're talking here about things that are way, way more important and way, way more significant for millions of people than to what me, Ziv, and Dana are exactly, who is funding our organizations. It's just completely irrelevant. And I think that this question comes from a place that is scared to realize the truth of what's happening and prefers to defend Israel instead of defending human rights.
But where is the representative of the IDF?
Please, Mr. Bushi, wait 1 second, please. Does Dana Moose or Ziv Stoll want to add something?
I think on top of everything that is very precise that Ori just said, criticizing Israel is not being against Israel, and that's something everyone should keep in mind. We all, as Ori said, we live in Israel, our families live in Israel. Of course, we care about Israel, and we want to make Israel better. It doesn't mean that we're against Israel. On the contrary, we want to make sure that we are living in a country that does not commit human rights violations, that do not break the international law. This is what the country that we want to live in. And for that, yes, you need sometimes to criticize your own home in order to make it better, to improve it. And there's nothing wrong with it. And we totally stand behind that.
Thank you very much. Dana Moose wants to add something. Yes.
Yes, I want to reinforce what Ziv and Ori said. And I also want to say, you know, there's an assumption in what you're saying that the occupation makes the lives of Israelis better. It doesn't make my life better. It doesn't make me more secure. It doesn't make my son more secure. It doesn't make my family more secure. And more than that, I think had you actually looked at Physicians for Human Rights Israel's website, you would see we work with 3,000 Israeli healthcare volunteers. We're not a sole voice. We don't only work on the OPT, we work on the right to health of everyone, including Israelis. Our belief is that this ongoing 50-plus-year occupation is not making our lives better as Israelis. It's not making Palestinians' lives. And if we want to change it, then we work within Israel and outside Israel to get some sort of shift in place.
Thank you. Is there any other question, please? Don't hesitate to raise your hands. So if there is not, I'd just like to ask perhaps one more question to you all. Considering the cases that you have exposed here, why aren't you going, or is there any possibility, or why aren't you going to court to denounce these facts and engage in a judicial process? Ziv, yes.
So like I explained in the presentation, we actually did go to court, to the Israeli High Court, and filed a petition about practice of searches. This is a beginning point. We wanted to see what would be the position of the state. The state could have also said, okay, we will look into it and maybe try to form some kind of judicial review, maybe a military judge or a civilian judge. But the position of the state was totally opposing any kind of change. So we do try to create a change within Israel as well. We also approach the military about the practice of mapping, asking them to review their practice on that and maybe consider whether this is a good enough reason to violate someone's privacy, to inflict such trauma and mental health implications on individuals. So we do try legally within the legal system in Israel and the military legal system to change this policy.
Thank you. Ori or Dana?
Yeah, we are not a legal organization. So Yesh Din are the legal organization doing this work. We focus on what we did, our testimonies and our actions. So in this question, I don't have a lot to add.
Thank you. Perhaps a question that is more general and next to the news today. Has the COVID crisis changed anything in this situation in your views? What's your observation about that? Who would like to answer?
So in general, the answer is no, not very much anyway. At the beginning of the COVID crisis, we did see some drop in the numbers of home invasions. And now I think it's back to the routine practice of performing home invasions as usual. We do know that the home invasions themselves raised a lot of concern on the part of Palestinians whose homes are invaded, because naturally we all experience that, not allowing strangers to enter our homes, more fear of being in a closed room with strangers, and the fact that in Israel, COVID had more eruptions at the beginning than in OPT. So having Israeli soldiers in the homes raised a lot of, I think, anxiety by Palestinians. But other than that, I don't know that there was a lot of other effect on home invasions.
I would like to add two things. One is that we're today in the absurd situation where every night Palestinian homes are invaded by soldiers who are completely, or in a week, will be completely vaccinated to COVID. But the Palestinians whose homes are invaded don't have this possibility. So that's, I think it's an absurd situation that we all have to understand. And the second thing is that during the Corona crisis, in recent months, recent weeks, even more, we saw a rise in home demolitions all over the occupied territories, specifically in the area of South Hebron Hills and the Jordan Valley, and also in East Jerusalem, we saw home demolitions. And we saw it, of course, a lot before the Corona crisis. But demolishing people's homes during this epidemic is something that we all need to know and talk about.
Thank you. Dana Moose, something to add on your side? No, okay. Is there any other questions? Please just raise your hands on clicking participants in the middle, in the center, bottom of the screen, and then another screen window opens, and you can click on the bottom right to raise your hands. If not, you can also use the chat room in clicking on discussion. So if there are no other questions, I perhaps just want you to ask if you have final remarks for this press conference, Zivi Stahl, or there is one question here. Let me see, Mr. Robert Roth. please tell us the organization you belong to and just ask your question or make your comment. Thank you. Floor is yours. Mr. Roth? Mr. Roth, can you hear us?
Yeah.
We can hear you. Okay.
Okay. Robert, NGO Protection, Geneva. Sorry, the sound is not very good with my Zoom. It's better on the website. No, my question is simple. Did you cooperate with Palestinian organization NGOs for this report, and in which way?
We can't hear you anymore. I'm sorry, we can't hear you. The line is broken. I invite you to write your question in the chat if it's possible.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, we can hear you now. Go on, Mr. Roth.
Mm-hmm.
Hello? Okay, this question is not over, but in this topic, somebody wants to try to react in a way or another? Okay, question is, did you cooperate with Palestinian NGOs for this report? Who wants to answer? Ms.
I think Dana is raising her hand, and then maybe I'll add after.
Okay.
Can you unmute Dana, please?
Yes.
Hi, I want to speak a bit on the follow-up to the report, because what we try to do, and admittedly, it's a bit of a drop in the ocean, is together with Yesh Din, but also together with the TRC, is we held mobile clinics to first, educate families, specifically the mothers. How do you react when the soldiers come in? How do you react in front of your children? And then the TRC Center also gave, which is based in the West Bank, also gave briefings to educators. How do you spot trauma? What can you do in the schools, etc. So that's, from our side, that was the cooperation we did. And do want to say that when we held our mobile our workshops with families, we did that together with local NGOs, with local women's organizations. So that's a bit of the cooperation that we did.
I'll just say that on the report itself, we didn't collaborate with any Palestinian organization, but the project included a lot of activities, other activities like Dana mentioned. So on that area, we did have a lot of connections with Palestinian organizations. What we did have in the report is we talked with a lot of people from all over the West Bank. And we did that through our connections with village councils, basically. So they could refer us to families who had their home invaded recently, and that's how we made the connection.
Thank you. Can I perhaps rebound on this question and ask you if there were some reaction to report from the governmental side, Israeli governmental side?
I don't think we heard any official response, unless if I'm not addressing what the state argued in court. So that's not on the report, but on the petition, but the same issue. We did see some campaigns from right-wing groups in Israel trying to accuse us of harming Israeli security and trying to weaken the, I think, IDF or Israel's ability to protect itself. But I don't think something other than that.
Thank you. Yes.
Dana, I see, is raising.
Dana wants to react.
Yes. It was also raised in the Knesset Committee on the Rights of the Child. where lawmakers did criticize this practice, actually. I do want to flag up that we also, as Physicians for Human Rights Israel, wrote to the Israeli Medical Association asking them to raise their opposition to the practice based on its extensive mental health effects, and they have noted that they will write to the authorities. So not an official governmental response, but the response by one of the biggest medical bodies in Israel.
Thank you. Is Ori wanting to add something to this? It's okay? Okay. So I guess if there are no other questions, you still have the chance to raise your hand or write in the chat. But if there are no other questions, we're going to wrap up here this press conference. I remind you all that the report, Life Exposed, is published on our website. You can get it on our website, www.pressclub.ch, as well as the executive summary in English and in French. So thank you to all of us for having joined us here on Zoom at this press conference from the Geneva Press Club, and thank you to the speakers. And I wish you all a good day, good afternoon today to all of you. Thank you.